Is there anyone who really thinks in full seriousness that Russia is capable of influencing the choice of the American people somehow? America is not a banana country, is it? America is a great power. If I'm not right, please correct me.
Was Russian President Vladimir Putin today speaking in Sochi about a banana country, where he dismissed concerns that his government is meddling in the U.S. election. Just before the break, you saw John's conversation with the New York Times national security correspondent, Mr. David Sanger. That was filmed for our Showtime documentary series, The Circus, produced in conjunction with Bloomberg Politics. Airs on Showtime Sunday nights at 8. We're joined now by the man himself, David Sanger. He's in the Times D.C. newsroom and here with us on the set, technology reporter and editor of Backchannel, Stephen Levy. Thank you both for coming. David, update us on what your latest sense is of what the U.S. government's posture is towards trying to retaliate against the Russians or taking some measure to either punitive or discouraging of them continuing what the U.S. government says they're doing.
Well, so far the discouraging of their activity has been limited to public statements they've made, including the one that Joe Biden made a bit more than a week ago now, threatening some kind of covert action to stop them. But the fact of the matter is, we haven't seen public sanctions, and if there has been covert action, it's been pretty subtle, and so far the only thing we've seen is the revelation in the Ukraine of some emails of an aide fairly close to Mr. Putin about their actions in Ukraine. No one's quite convinced that that was American action, that if the U.S. did something, they were hoping it would be a little bigger than that. There is some debate about whether or not the administration should even act before the election, because if you do act before the election, that gives the Russians a chance to act back on the day of. So it's possible you're not going to see real retaliation until after November 8th.
I want to ask you this question, Stephen, just to start down the path that I really want to go down, which is what happens next, potentially? Forget about WikiLeaks and the stuff they're putting out, trying to screw with this election and mess up with Hillary Clinton. What about Election Day? What's the risk?
Well, there's a lot of risk. We saw last week a big attack on some internet companies, on the infrastructure of the internet there. And if that happened during Election Day, maybe as a broader attack, there'd be a good amount of chaos there. A lot of the communication.
And still no indication who was responsible for that, right?
No, we don't know. The feeling was this was not an international attack. It wasn't a foreign government doing that. But other people think it's a probe. And then again, there could be chaos. It doesn't have to be the Russians. It could be individual actors in anywhere in the world, really. So there's been a lot of people talking for a few cycles now about the vulnerability of our election systems. One thing that's in our favor is it's not one centralized system. So if you're going to attack the general election system, probably the best way would be over the whole internet in general, because there's 51 different states and districts who are voting there, and each one has a different system.
Hey, David, I want to talk to you about one of the things. We know the voting machines are not online, right? They're not hooked into the internet. Obviously, as Stephen suggests, if there was a massive outage in the internet, that would create a certain kind of atmospheric chaos. But the thing you and I discussed down in Washington was something more specific, going to the question of affecting voter registration, and those systems are online. So just sketch out the scenario by which that could create some chaos and pandemonium on Election Day.
Sure. So, the possibility here is you've got a lot of people who are newly registered. They register into a central database, and they show up on Election Day, and they've got their little receipt from the day they registered, if they remembered to bring it, but nobody can find them. Then they have to vote on a provisional ballot. If you had a lot of those, if you had thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands, it would really slow the works down, and you might not even get conclusions that night. Now, a lot of states are preparing for that. Many of them are printing out their database or printing it out in sections and giving it to the polling places so that there's a backup to the system. But as you've just heard, every state is different. And as a result, everyone's got different procedures. Same is true when you get to the actual voting and the voting machines. Most of them are offline, although there are a lot of people who are overseas or veterans who are allowed to vote by email. There's some question about the security of that. And even if that happens, there are a lot of states, 5 in specific, that do not have any paper backup to the ballot that you cast. So if there's a question later on, very little to go back and do the audit. Other states have only partial backup.
You know, if you wanted to slow down and generally have some polling places where there was some chaos and you were hacking it, the question would be, how could they really tell? Because I can guarantee with confidence that there's going to be polling places in this district or that where people are going to be lined up, not able to vote. There's going to be people to show up to say, I could legally vote, and they're not going to be able to vote there. I think there's a 100% chance of that happening anyway.
Right, but obviously wider spread cast if the entire polling place was shut down. I asked you about WikiLeaks. To the extent we understand their motives, their goals, do you think they're feeling that what they've done with the Podesta emails has been a success?
I think from Julian Assange's point, yes, it has been a success.
By what metric?
It's been a success. I mean, certainly the very first one, where they be able to get the head of the DNC to resign, right? That's a pretty good hit. It's interesting. Some of the ones that came out, talking about Hillary's speeches there, had they come out during the primaries, I think they would have had a bigger impact there. Right. Their impact was greatly reduced because it happened to be the same day that we watched Donald Trump in the trailer talking about his views on women, right? So they were pretty much overshadowed there. So I think generally he feels that there is an impact. Again, we don't know what, if anything, is to come. Though I have seen something interesting happening as these mail drops keep happening, is that they have successively less impact there. So my hopeful view is that we're getting desensitized now to what's in private emails there. And so maybe there's some version of order restored to the universe as we realize that just because email is stolen, it isn't necessarily salacious on its face.
Right, David, we had Y2K, which is a different proposition, but the same kind of anticipation of a potentially cataclysmic event. And we see when there's a Super Bowl or other things, they're the so-called national security events. How much of the limited bandwidth of the intelligence community and computer experts within the federal government is going towards preparing for Election Day?
I've just been talking to some people who've been involved in that effort, and they're preparing for it in a monitoring sense. But remember, the voting system is a state and local system in the United States. And so not only is there no central database, there's no central authority, no federal authority over this. In fact, as we discussed the other day, the voting system is not considered to be critical infrastructure. The Washington Monument is, the Jefferson Memorial is, movie theaters are, but not the underpinnings of our democracy. That's something likely to change after Election Day. So you have federal government officials who can look for signs of trouble, but they don't have a lot of authority here because that authority is vested in the states.
David, I want to stay with you real quick just to talk about one other Election Day scenario, which is the possibility that an intrusion could happen in terms of how the vote totals are reported on television networks and in other media. Talk about that a little bit, because that could obviously also cause some chaos.
It sure can. And remember, the vote totals that you hear on Election Eve are unofficial totals. They're sort of a quick put together. And let's say in a close state like North Carolina, the early results you got were Donald Trump up by 3. And of course, I'm making up these numbers, right? And then a few days later, after all the official numbers are together and all of the mail-in ballots are counted and everything else, what you hear is, no, Hillary Clinton won it by 1. You're going to have a lot of Trump supporters under that circumstance say, hey, something suspicious happened here. Yep. I heard that night that he won and now she won. Was somebody playing with the numbers? So the answer might be that somebody was playing with the preliminary numbers but not with the real numbers.
Right.